In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how easy it is to add multilingual localization features to your Flex application. In particular, I'm going to be showing you how to use the BabelFx Localization Framework within your own source code to add multilingual features. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is our sample Flex project. And if we open up the main application file, we can see that it is a very simple, almost Hello World-like application. We have a label and a button. If we run this, we can see here, very simple. If I return back to the source code, this current application doesn't have any localization features within it at all. So let's go ahead and start adding those. We want to add localization or multilingual features for English and Portuguese. To do that, the first thing we need to do is externalize the content from this application into property files for each locale that we would like to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is create some property files. So let's create those property files in an L10N package. That just makes it nice and simple, and we're consolidating everything. So we'll call this L10N locale, and let's do one for English first. We're using the locale codes for English, and we'll be using another one for Portuguese. Now that we have the package, let's go ahead and create a property file. Since we only have one application class that we're using here, we'll create a property file called main. It's the main property file. Let's do this. Main.properties. We'll create this in the English. Let's take a look at the advanced. We don't want to do that. So now we have that. I like to open up my properties file in a text window. And what we want is to create, for the label title, a key value pair. So for label title, its value is getting started with BabelFx sample. Now I like to prefix my keys with the name of the property file also, so we can say, or with the context. So we'll say main.labelTitle. And let's do another one for the button go to. Main.buttonGoTo. And we'll copy this here. Go to next locale. Now that we've created an English version, let's create a Portuguese version of the same property file. Notice, the only thing we're doing here is localizing the text content. We could also localize for colors, for strings, even for fonts or images. But in this case, for the very simple application here, we're just going to localize the text. Now I'm going to create another package for Portuguese, and the locale code for that is pt_br. Let's hit finish. And to make things a little simpler, let's just copy that file and paste it in here. The thing that I want to point out is when you're using locales, you must set your text file encoding to UTF-8. If you don't, the application will compile, but during runtime, it's highly likely that your non-English characters will be scrambled and will not look correctly. So encode the text file, the property file, as UTF-8. So yes. Now let's open this up in a text editor. There's the one. So notice it's the same name, it's just in a different package, the pt_br, the Portuguese version. So I want to use the same keys, but I want to change the values of those keys to be the equivalent in Portuguese. There we go. We'll save that. Now we've created the properties files that we're going to be using within the application. The next step is to tell the compiler where these property files are located and which ones to use. This is a two-step process. The first thing we're going to do is go into the project properties under Flex Compiler. Down here we can see that by default when you create a Flex project, it's going to be using the English locale. So this locale tells it to use not only English within your own custom code, but also to gather the localized resources, the English resources for the MX framework, and use those also in the compile as needed. So the first thing we want to do is tell it that we also want to use the Portuguese version. That's great. Now we're telling it the locales we want are English and Portuguese. Now we have to tell it where the source path is for our custom property files that are here in the English and Portuguese packages. So we'll say the source path is added to the existing source path, and it's L10N locale, and then whichever locale that it's trying to compile for. So this syntax is a little odd. Let me zoom in here so you can see this. It's a little odd. We're saying the L10N package, the locale subpackage, and then whichever one that we currently want. So that's English would be substituted there, or Portuguese. All right. Now, all too often, we're going to have to tell the compiler to allow the source paths to overlap, because this source path is actually within the source package here. Right there. So the L10N is within the source package. So I need to tell it that the source paths can overlap. That way the compiler won't complain. Allow source path overlap equals true. There we go. I can hit apply there, hit OK, and now when I compile, everything is compiling fine. The last thing we need to do, we've told the compiler where the properties files are, but we haven't told the compiler which ones we want to use. Well, we only have one for each locale, and that's called main. So what we need to do is tell the compiler we want to use that main.properties file within our application. So within MXML, we can come in here and we can say, all right, I'm going to create a resource bundle. And the one that I want to use is the main.properties file. So I'll just say main. If I had other property files, I could add them here to the list. This tells the compiler to link in the property files for main, for English and Portuguese, into this application when I build it. Now when I run, it's actually going to build the properties files, compile those in, include that compiled resource bundle into the bytecode for the application, because I'm embedding it in here, and then it will be available during runtime. So now I have embedded my compiled resource bundles, but I'm not able to use those. Nothing's happening here. What's going on? The reason nothing is happening here when we click on the Go to Next locale is that while we have embedded the localized resources into the application, we have done nothing to tell the resource manager to switch the locale, nor have we done anything to tell the UI components to use the new resource content, new localized content. To demonstrate that, let me show you how you would do that using the classic Flex approach. Let's open up another version of the Getting Started. So we can see here that, by the way, the current version knows nothing about the resource manager at all, other than embedding the resource bundles within the bytecode. If we come into another version, the classic approach that's recommended by the Flex Adobe team is to use a resource manager reference and to load the get string from the main bundle for the key main.labelTitle. That gets the string and places it into the runtime instance of the text property. This works great. This tells each UI element to pull the content via the resource manager, to pull that in to the UI. Here's another version for the button. So this tells the resource manager to pull it in, but what triggers the resource manager to say, hey, something has happened, something has changed? Well, to change the locale, you use the locale chain, and you simply change the locale chain. By default, the chain here is this. Is English and Portuguese. That's because when we said in our compiler dash locale equals en underscore us comma pt underscore br, the English was first, so it created an array for English and Portuguese. But we want to switch this on the fly, so when you click the button, we want to switch it to be Portuguese first. If I run this, we can see exactly what happens. It switches to the Portuguese version. That's great. Unfortunately, that is not the recommended solution. Instead, we want to use BabelFx to inject the localized content into our UI dynamically without any changes to our source code for our user interface source code. So let's see how that's done.